I'm glad to be here. And this is the best weather of any city I've been in this week, and we've been in a lot of them.
Well, welcome back, sir.
It's good to be back.
What was it like where you were?
Cold,
what were you
rainy.
doing? Were you campaigning or pondering campaigning? Or?
Yeah, we were campaigning. It was in Philadelphia and New Jersey doing some political meetings, and it was wonderful. But it's good to be back in Iowa.
You've been around the country now quite a bit. You're outside the Midwest a little bit. How are you received elsewhere?
Well, it's really good. I am not as well known as some of the candidates or potential candidates that ran last time, but I like our position. We got good momentum, good energy. And, of course, we're putting particular emphasis on Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and places like that. But we also want to build some downstream capacity as well. But so far, so good.
We've been talking about the last several days, one form or another, and the president spoke on this the other day about energy.
Yeah.
And his energy address has been reviewed by all kinds of people. I wonder what your review is.
Well, it's like everything else with this president. First of all, it's all talk and no action. If he wants to be serious about severing us from foreign oil, which is a goal I support, we don't want to be this reliant economically or from a security perspective on places that don't like us, don't share our values, don't share our interests, then the first thing he should do is about maximizing American sources of energy. And let's have drilling in Anwar. Let's have drilling off our coast, particularly with state approval. Let's make sure that we have clean coal and use the 250-year supply of coal that we have in this country. Let's expand nuclear, make sure that it's safe. Let's use this game-changing amount of natural gas that we've now found and discovered within the territorial reach of the United States. And Jen, as you know, there's enough natural gas within the territorial reach of the United States of America to power our entire baseload energy needs for at least 100 years and maybe 200 or 300 years. Let's do that. And then for the renewables, let's do those that make economic, rational sense. But this is a president who's basically put a lid on coal. He's going to symbolically only expand nuclear. He says one thing about how great he wants to, get us off foreign oil, but he doesn't want to do anything about it or take any real leadership along the lines that I just described.
How would you evaluate his trip to Brazil?
Oh, well, completely out of sync with the issues and needs of our time. We've got a country that's reeling economically. We had one of the worst disasters in Asia in modern history of the globe. We had the Arab Spring unfolding before our eyes, and he's in Brazil. Now, we want to build good relations with Brazil, but that's a trip that should have been canceled, and he should have been paying attention to those matters. By the way, he goes to Brazil and applauds their energy independence. And one of the main reasons that Brazil is energy independent is because of their own domestic exploration and drilling of oil. There's other things as well, but that was one of the main things.
Minnesota was an early proponent of ethanol
Yes.
and mandates. Do you think that that's a mandating use and stuff like even mileage mandates and CAFE standards, do you think those things are a part of the mix or should be?
I've been a strong proponent of renewable fuels, but we need to focus on those things that make economic sense, Jen. So ethanol, biodiesel are things that I've strongly supported in a variety of ways. But let's face it, they're now going to have to also transition to the next phase of cellulosic fuels. There's a lot of hopeful developments on that front, none that have yet been brought to scale. But remember, as we talk about subsidies, mandates, and the like, it doesn't just apply to biofuels. Oil is subsidized. Coal is subsidized. The whole nuclear energy was researched, paid for, commercialized, and to this day is subsidized by the federal government. So if we're going to talk about subsidies, don't just pick on biofuels. Let's put them all on the table.
If that's the case, I like that idea. Let the marketplace decide these things, but we don't know what the market is for most of the things we consume because there's somebody's thumb on the scale almost all the time. If we were to factor in to the cost of the price of gasoline at the pump, all of the defense-related expenditures, our view of what kind of mileage we get, what kind of cars we buy, if we actually had to pay for our foreign policy at the pump. I know that's almost suicidal to think in those terms because the way the world is organized, but wouldn't we have a more true view of what the marketplace is serving up if we knew what the real cost of our behavior was?
Well, of course. And your question also makes another point, profoundly important point, as you so frequently do, Jam. But
pandering works, by the way. I really appreciate it.
Anytime the government gets involved in manipulating the market, it creates inefficiencies. It creates government picking winners and losers. It leads to crony capitalism. In worst case, it can lead to corruption.
Or war.
And so if we believe in markets, if we believe in freedom, if we believe in giving people the ability to make choices for what's best for them, their family, their businesses, they'll make wise and good choices, and it'll be the most efficient distributor of capital and resources. And government, whether it's through the tax code, earmarking and spending, incentives, mandates, and the like, every time they manipulate the market, they remove those values that I just described.
All right. So, which brings me to a related question. There was, I think it was Senator Mitch McConnell this week, introduced pieces of legislation that would try to limit the EPA in its backdoor attempt to go after the to in essence raise taxes and pay for in essence the backdoor way to invoke the EPA and attack global warming and all that kind of stuff. You've gone through some transitions on some of these positions yourself at one time, and people have asked me, "Hey, ask him the tough question. Ask him the tough stuff for a change."
Yeah.
Well, the tough stuff is, hey, you did a commercial with Judge Napolitano once talking about global warming and cap and trade. You were theoretically in support of cap and trade. What is your thinking on that, and why then, and what's now?
Yeah, well, a couple of years ago or so, Jen, I completely disavowed that position and said I was wrong. It was a mistake, and I wrote a letter to the Congress saying, don't pass cap and trade. The country doesn't support it. The Congress doesn't support it. I don't support it. It's a bad idea. It's ham-fisted. So this is not a recent development, but all of the likely, or I should say the leading 2012 candidates at one point or another embrace the same thing. So without naming names, know that almost no, I won't, but know that almost everybody in the race had the same position at one point or another in various degrees. But I came out 2 years ago and said, look, I made a mistake. I've got some clunkers in my record like everybody does who's been in an executive position, but I think mine are fewer.
I'm sorry. It was Janet Napolitano. I didn't mean Judge Napolitano.
Janet Napolitano.
Thank you.
But bottom line is I certainly considered it, concluded it was wrong, bad idea, and disavowed that position a couple years ago.
This administration seems to be pursuing all the assumptions of global warming theory in their energy policy. When it comes to carbon-based energy, when it comes to fossil fuels, they seem to be starting with the assumption we cannot and should not be pursuing these things. Even if it is cheaper, it's doing too much damage to the environment. We can't allow ourselves to go in that direction.
Yeah, well, they don't call it, first of all, America warming. It's global warming to the extent it exists. So you have China, India, and other places just saying we're not going to do it. India just said forget it.
Why are you convinced that he's wrong?
Who?
The president, or the assumptions of the global warming
reasons,
or the environmental?
If you start with the proposition of climate change, the climate's always changing. So there's no doubt that the climate changes. The real question is, why is it changing, and how much of that, if any, is attributable to human behavior? And of course, there's a great scientific debate whether any of it, a little, some, a lot, is caused by human behavior. But the bottom line is, I think the weight of the science indicates, that if there's any human behavior involved, it's a modest amount. So what do we do about that? First of all, we don't do things that are going to be ham-fisted and wreck the economy. Cap and trade, particularly as proposed by the Democrats, and generally is a ham-fisted, misguided, wrong direction to deal with the issue. I think the better way to deal with issues like this is to find technology, use markets, and let them come forward and sort out the solutions to these issues. And I think climate change occurs, but I think the bulk of it is mostly natural, historic trends in the climate. And I think there's some suggestion that humans have caused some of it. But the answer isn't to have government then come in with this top-down cap-and-trade scheme. I think let the markets work, let technology work, let people's preferences work, and they'll figure out the best way to address it.